One of the first things that a person needs to understand is that revolutions do not happen in a vacuum. They happen for a reason.
Cuba is located in the northern Caribbean, 90 miles from the southernmost point of Florida, where the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic Ocean meet. The corrupt dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista had dominated the political and economic life of Cuba for 7 years. With help of the United States, Batista instituted an oppressive social system which implemented a brutal dictatorship that by the end of 1958, most Cubans found themselves bitterly opposed to.
Galling for a lot of Cubans was the fact that the United States was supporting dictatorial rule within Cuba.
Fidel Castro was the son of a wealthy sugarcane farmer.
I think he was someone who came along at a particular moment in time and recognized possibilities.
In 1953, Fidel Castro gathered supporters and led an attack on the Moncada barracks near Santiago de Cuba. The strike ended in failure, and Castro was captured and sentenced to 15 years. In 1955, Batista, facing international pressure, gave amnesty to many political prisoners, including Fidel Castro. Fidel and his brother Raúl fled to Mexico, where they met a Cuban revolutionary, Camilo Cienfuegos, and an Argentinian Che Guevara. Together, they organized the 26th of July movement. In December of 1956, Fidel led 82 fighters to Cuba aboard the yacht Granma. The boat crash-landed in a mangrove swamp at Playa Las Coloradas. Batista's forces ambushed and promptly killed, dispersed, or captured most of Castro's men. Castro and 12 other fighters barely managed to escape into the Sierra Maestra Mountains.
He gained a lot of support in the mountains. He made sure that the guerrillas did not abuse campesinos and successfully used the urban underground movement against Batista. A whole untold history of the Cuban Revolution is the role of women. Women in the urban areas played a critically important role in providing arms, information, communication to Fidel and the 26th of July movement when they were up in the mountains.
There was always some sort of military sponsored anti-government activity. And my grandfather would find out ahead of time, and we would all go up to the mountains where he had friends and they had places. And I remember having to pack and go with them and then be gone for a few weeks until the coup d'etat came along, and then we would all come back.
I think he was an extraordinary planner. He had an extraordinary capacity to plan, to execute his strategies, his efforts at mobilization, his communication systems. The way in which he fought the guerrilla war from the mountains was extraordinary. He invited a North American reporter from the New York Times, journalist Herbert Matthews, to come up into the mountains and carry out interviews with him. There's a whole argument. Herbert Matthews helped Fidel Castro to win the revolution by going up and interviewing him and publishing 3 famous articles, I think in 1958, that suggested that Fidel Castro's guerrilla movement was strong, alive, and well.
We have accepted the start of the revolution. We gladly suffer cold and rain and the hardship of life in the mountain. This is only the beginning. The last battle will be fought in the capital. You can be sure.
The revolutionary forces made a move for Havana. The final holdouts of Batista's forces were driven from the city. New Year's Eve 1958, Castro marched into Havana with cheers and applause. The revolution had succeeded. Castro became prime minister, Raúl his deputy, and Guevara the president of the Cuban National Bank.
We marched from Havana University to the capital, and there was going to be a shutdown of the whole country because he was going to speak And I started thinking, I said, I'm leaving because I'm not going to walk back. It's going to be a long, long walk. And I remember I had a couple of my buddies there. And I said, I'm getting the heck out of here. And them saying, nah, we're going to stay. We want to see Fidel and all that stuff. I said, okay, goodbye.
One day, I'm coming back from a trip to Mexico, and my major professor at the university was also the minister of revenue, the Department of Revenue. And he went to the airport. He picked me up. That was very strange. And he says, you have to leave Cuba. I said, why? Well, he says, they appointed a new minister, and he's known for killing people. I said, yeah, who's that? Che Guevara. So here's a man who knew absolutely nothing about economics, now in charge of a very perilous economic system.
He got rid of a number of commanders, the high-level military guys that were with him. The most notable guy was a guy by the name Camilo Cienfuegos.
He was the nephew of a senator from the province where I live. And Camilo, he was in charge of the militia. And Camilo was funny, kind of the intellectual of the group, and the guy you want to go and have a beer with. And I was in Camilo's office, and he was planning to take the trip. So I asked him if I could bum a ride, and he used to fly a small 2-engine plane with maybe 6 passengers. And he dropped me off in Cienfuegos, and then he kept on going. And then I heard the next day that he played that track.
Meanwhile, in Havana,
this is the accused prisoner, Sosa Blanco. He's accused of killing 53 peasants in one day. Accused of assassination, robbery, and murder.
Hundreds of Batista-era agents were all put on public trial, then processed by name, birthday, city, then accused of human rights abuses, war crimes, murder, and torture, and convicted of political crimes by the revolutionary tribunals. The accused would be then executed by firing squad.
We was dressed different. They said the name. Did he kill anybody? Yes, he did. Do you see him here? She says, yes. Can you point him? And she points to the guy. He was deemed guilty and he was shot. But the point here, did he kill people? Absolutely. No question about it. But they couldn't prove it. Revolutions
are complicated. They're often violent. And I think it's very difficult if you hadn't lived through it. It's hard. I think it was very difficult for many of the revolutionaries to forgive what the Batista folks had done for during the course of the 1950s and the people they were allied with even previous to that.
Castro abolished class disparities by confiscating and redistributing privately owned properties. He then expropriated land for agrarian reform and nationalized all foreign and domestic business enterprises without compensation. The Cubans who left Cuba in 1959 were either anti-Castro or had political ties with the ousted Batista regime. Most did not expect exile to last long, thinking Cuba would soon be liberated, first placing their hopes on the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, and later on the certainty that the United States would never allow the consolidation of a communist government 90 miles away from their shores.
My father was exiled in the Mexican embassy. My mother was in the Uruguayan. And before my father went into the Mexican embassy, he went and lived with his cousin in hiding. And for us to go see him, we would have to go and sneak around. We would take different buses instead of taking the car so that they could, if we were followed, it would be traced. And before my mother went into the embassy, she sneaked everything out of our apartment. except one big couch that she wasn't able to sleep down. So she literally says, I'm not leaving it, I'm going to destroy it. And she literally took a butcher knife to the couch.
The director of the school was an American, and she had also prepared to leave Cuba. 1959, Fidel Castro came in. And I remember that in her desk she had her new passport, and then she had her old passport that had the word canceled printed on it. So I asked her if I could have the old passport. And she said, sure. She gave it to me. I then fixed the passport so that it would look as if it didn't have any thing in the front, and I kept it. And so when I was told that it was time to leave, I went home and put on a garment that my mother had made for me that had a secret pocket inside and another secret pocket for money that I wasn't allowed to take out. And he made up a conference. He said that there was a conference in Spain and I had to go. So he got me a ticket and I went to my conference in Madrid.
I wanted to start a strike against the revolution. I started making contact with some of the people. My family heard about it. Like, you're gonna get killed here. Bye-bye. And within 2 days, they put me on a flight out.
I remember the plane is getting ready to leave, and the militia came and stopped the plane, and they boarded the plane. I used to know the guy's name. They called out a name, and the guy responded, and they grabbed him, his wife. His wife had a little kid in her arms, and they took him off the plane. And then they left and finally took off, and I left Havana on the way to Barajas International Airport in Madrid, Spain.
I caught a flight to New York from Madrid. And I got to the airport and I was celebrating. I was so happy to be there. And so I ordered a drink at the bar. And there was another guy who had the same situation I was in, different airplane. And we started drinking together. I knew some of the Catalonian songs. And so we sat there drunk and singing. So then suddenly the bartender says, "What's your plane?" I looked at my watch and I said, "Oh my God." So I got off my chair and started running toward the gate. I got to the gate and there was an agglomeration of people at the gate. I worked my way and I showed them my ticket. And I remember the woman turned white, literally. She says, "You missed the plane." I said, "Oh, okay." Is there another one tomorrow? She says, "Yes, but you don't know what happened." "No, what happened?" "While your flight was crossing the Pyrenees, it had an accident of some sort, and it crashed in the Pyrenees. And so far, we don't think anybody survived."
They haven't changed anything. Fidel died, and the crap is continuing because his brother's continuing it. There's no freedom there. It's the ones that are in the big Communist Party, those are the ones that have the power, those are the ones that have the money. And those are it. But there's nothing else.
I wish we had some leadership who would be open to understanding revolutionary history and more open to a relationship with Cuba. I was particularly inspired during the Obama period when he went to Cuba. Obviously, there are tens of thousands of Americans who are interested in going to Cuba visiting Cuba, learning about Cuba, embracing Cuba, and I just find it a disgrace that we have a government that can't do that, is incapable of doing that. So I guess that would be a comment that I would want to make about Cuba.